There are moments in life when everything feels determined to break you at the exact same time. For me, it started in a grocery store parking lot. At that point, I had already spent almost 8 months unemployed. 8 exhausting months of sending resumes, pretending confidence during interviews, and hearing the same polite rejection phrases over and over again. We decided to move forward with another candidate. We're looking for someone with more recent experience. We'll keep your information on file. Nobody ever calls back from the file. Meanwhile, bills kept arriving exactly on time. Rent, electricity, school supplies, medicine. Life doesn't pause just because you're struggling. My name is Hannah Miller, and by 34, my life looked nothing like I imagined it would. I was divorced, a single mother of 2, and abandoned in the most humiliating way possible. 3 years earlier, my husband Daniel left for what he claimed was a temporary construction job in another state. At first he still called occasionally, then less, then not at all. No explanation, no goodbye, no money, nothing. One day he simply disappeared from our lives completely. At first I kept trying to explain it gently to the kids. Dad's busy working. Then, Dad's having problems. Eventually even I stopped believing my own excuses. After enough silence, abandonment stops feeling temporary. It becomes reality. Still, I kept going because mothers don't really have another option. Every morning I woke up exhausted and continued anyway. That Tuesday started like every other difficult day in my life lately. I borrowed $20 from my mother for groceries, loaded my 2 kids into my old gray Honda, and drove to the discount supermarket across town. The car barely survived the trip. The engine had started making horrible noises weeks earlier, but repairs weren't realistic when I was already choosing between gas and groceries. So I kept driving and praying. Inside the store, I spent nearly an hour calculating prices down to cents, putting things back, switching brands, checking my bank app repeatedly. My daughter Lily asked quietly if we could buy cereal with the cartoon tiger mascot she liked. I remember smiling apologetically and saying, "Maybe next time, sweetheart." The truth was there probably wouldn't be a next time for a while. After paying, I loaded several heavy grocery bags into my cart and walked back outside with both kids beside me. That's when my car finally gave up completely. The engine wouldn't start. Not once. Not twice. Nothing. I sat there gripping the steering wheel while panic slowly climbed into my chest. Please not today. Please. But life rarely waits for convenient timing before collapsing. After 20 minutes of trying unsuccessfully to restart the car, I finally gave up. I called my mother crying quietly while standing beside the parking lot. She couldn't pick us up because she was working. I couldn't afford a tow truck. And we lived nearly 40 minutes away. So eventually I made the only decision available. I grabbed as many grocery bags as I could carry, took my children's hands, and started walking toward the nearest bus stop. It was freezing outside. Not snowing. Just cold enough that the wind hurt your face after several minutes. The grocery bags dug painfully into my fingers while my son Noah kept coughing beside me. At one point Lily whispered, "Mommy, are we poor?" I still think about that question sometimes late at night. Because children notice everything eventually. Even the things you desperately try hiding from them. By the time we reached the intersection near the bus stop, my arms felt numb from carrying groceries. The crosswalk light changed. We started walking. And then suddenly, a car came flying around the corner far too fast. I heard tires screeching. Someone shouting. Then pain exploded through my body. For several seconds I couldn't understand what happened. The grocery bags scattered across the street. Milk containers burst open across the pavement. Eggs shattered. Glass jars rolled into traffic. And my left arm hurt so badly I thought I might pass out. People rushed toward us immediately. Someone called an ambulance. Another woman moved my children away from the road while they cried hysterically. The driver kept repeating, "I didn't see her. Oh my God, I didn't see her." I remember lying on the freezing pavement staring at ruined groceries mixed with dirty rainwater, and thinking something completely irrational. Now I have to buy food all over again. Not, am I okay? Not, what if my arm is broken? Just, how am I supposed to afford groceries again? That's what survival mode does to people. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a fracture in my arm. Not severe enough for surgery. Severe enough to make life miserable. Especially as a single mother with no stable income. The driver's insurance company contacted me 2 days later. First, I actually felt hopeful. Finally, maybe something would go right. The accident clearly wasn't my fault. There were witnesses, traffic cameras, police reports. For the first time in months, I thought maybe life had finally thrown me one piece of luck. Then the insurance adjuster offered me an amount so insulting, I genuinely thought I misunderstood him. It barely covered the emergency room bill. Nothing for lost groceries. Nothing for transportation problems. Nothing for missed opportunities because of my injury. And when I pushed back, the adjuster suddenly became colder. More professional. More careful. That was the moment I realized something painful. People become much less compassionate once money enters the conversation. I hung up the phone shaking with frustration and helpless anger. That night after the kids fell asleep, I sat alone in my kitchen staring at overdue bills while my arm throbbed painfully inside its brace. And for the first time in a very long time, I cried so hard I could barely breathe. 2 days later, I contacted a lawyer. Honestly, I almost didn't. People imagine lawsuits as dramatic victories where justice eventually appears and fixes everything. But when you're broke, exhausted, and emotionally overwhelmed, even asking for help feels expensive. Still, I couldn't let it go. Not because I wanted revenge against the driver. Because I needed stability. I needed help. And most importantly, I needed someone to finally tell me life wasn't going to stay this hard forever. That's how I met Claire Donovan. The law office looked expensive enough to make me nervous immediately. Dark wood furniture. Quiet reception area. People speaking confidently into headsets while carrying folders worth more than my monthly rent. Meanwhile, I sat there in a cheap winter coat trying not to look desperate. Claire came out personally to meet me. She looked maybe early 40s. Elegant. Sharp-eyed. Calm in a way successful people often are. But unlike most professionals I'd met lately, she actually looked at me while speaking. Not through me. That mattered more than she probably realized. Inside her office, I explained everything. The accident. The insurance company. The injury. The financial situation. At one point, I became embarrassed hearing my own problems out loud. I sounded like one of those tragic stories people politely pity before moving on with their lives. But Claire listened carefully the entire time. No interruptions. No judgment. When I finished, she folded her hands together and said confidently, "We can win this." Those 4 words changed everything emotionally. We can win this. For the first time in months, someone sounded certain about something. I nearly cried from relief right there in her office. Claire explained the process carefully. Witness statements. Medical records. Traffic footage. Insurance negotiations. It won't happen overnight, she warned gently. But you deserve proper compensation. Deserve. Another word I hadn't heard in a long time. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because my life suddenly improved. Because hope returned. And hope can make even terrible situations temporarily survivable. Over the next 4 weeks, I called Claire's office constantly. Probably too often, honestly. Every update became emotionally important to me. Whenever her assistant said, "We're making progress," I slept better that night. I started imagining possibilities again. Fixing the car. Paying overdue rent. Buying proper winter clothes for the kids. Maybe even breathing without constant panic for once. Then court day arrived. And everything collapsed again. The hearing itself lasted less than 2 hours. Less than 2 hours to decide whether my suffering mattered financially. The insurance company lawyers argued aggressively that my injuries were minor. That the driver attempted braking. That weather conditions contributed. That my financial struggles existed before the accident. As if poverty somehow made pain less legitimate. Claire fought hard. I could see it. She challenged inconsistencies. Presented evidence clearly. Cross-examined witnesses carefully. But deep down, something felt wrong from the beginning. The judge looked impatient. Detached. Like another exhausted professional trying to finish another inconvenient case. Then came the decision. We lost. No meaningful compensation. No financial recovery. Nothing. I remember sitting there frozen while the words echoed around the courtroom. Case dismissed. That was it. Just like that. Weeks of hope erased in seconds. Outside the courthouse, Claire immediately started apologizing. "I'm so sorry, Hannah. I barely heard her." My ears rang painfully while panic spread through my chest again. Because losing the case didn't just mean disappointment. It meant survival became uncertain again. I drove home silently gripping the steering wheel with my good hand while my arm still ached beneath the brace. That night after putting the kids to bed, I sat on my kitchen floor crying quietly beside unopened bills. Not dramatic crying. The exhausted kind. The kind where your body doesn't even have energy for emotion anymore. I hated everyone that night. The driver. The insurance company. The judge. Even Claire. Because she promised me we'd win. And I believed her. Life became worse after that. Much worse. Within another week, both kids got sick at the same time. Fever. Coughing. No sleep. Meanwhile, my refrigerator started leaking. Then my landlord emailed about late rent. Then my old Honda officially stopped working completely. I remember standing in my kitchen one morning while Noah cried from fever in the bedroom and Lily asked if we had cereal left. And something inside me finally snapped emotionally. Suddenly all I could think about was Claire. That lawyer. That promise. That courtroom. We can win this. The sentence replayed in my head over and over until anger completely overwhelmed logic. I called my mother immediately. "Can you watch the kids for a few hours?" "Hannah, what happened?" "I just need you to please come over." 30 minutes later, I was driving my mother's car toward Claire's office while rage and exhaustion burned through my chest like fire. By the time I arrived, I was shaking. The receptionist looked startled when I walked in. "I need to speak with Claire Donovan. Do you have an appointment?" "No." Before she could answer, I marched directly toward Claire's office. I honestly don't even remember making the decision consciously. I just remember opening the door too hard and hearing Claire look up in surprise from behind her desk. "Hannah." And then everything exploded out of me. "You promised me we'd win." My voice cracked immediately. "I trusted you. I thought things were finally going to get better." Claire stood slowly. "Hannah." "No." I shouted. "Do you understand what happened because we lost?" I started crying before I could stop myself. Not elegant tears. Not controlled emotion. Real breakdown crying. The kind built from months of fear, humiliation, loneliness, and exhaustion finally crashing together at once. "My kids are sick," I sobbed. "I can't pay rent. My car is dead. Everything keeps getting worse and I don't know what to do anymore." The room became completely silent. I expected security, embarrassment, maybe pity. Instead, Claire walked around her desk quietly and handed me tissues. No defensiveness. No anger. Just patience. That somehow made me cry harder. "I'm sorry," I whispered eventually. "I shouldn't have come here." Claire shook her head gently. "No," she said softly. "You shouldn't have had to survive this much alone." That sentence broke something open inside me emotionally. Because nobody had said anything remotely compassionate to me in so long. I sat there trembling while trying unsuccessfully to calm down. Claire waited patiently until I could breathe normally again. Then she asked quietly, "Hannah, have you ever worked in an office before?" I blinked in confusion. "What?" "Administrative work. Reception. Filing. Client communication." I stared at her. "A little," I admitted cautiously. "Years ago." Claire nodded thoughtfully. Then she said something I never expected. "I need another assistant." For several seconds I genuinely thought I misunderstood her. "What?" "It's not glamorous work," she admitted. "Mostly organization, paperwork, scheduling, and helping around the office." I just stared at her speechless. "Why would you offer me that?" Claire smiled sadly. "Because life clearly hasn't offered you enough kindness lately." The first few months at Claire Donovan's law office felt strange in ways I didn't expect. Not bad. Just unfamiliar. After spending nearly a year unemployed, rejected, and constantly worried about survival, simply having somewhere I needed to be every morning already felt life-changing. Even if the work itself wasn't glamorous. Especially at first. Most of my days were filled with tiny tasks nobody else wanted to deal with. Finding missing files. Organizing folders. printing case documents, scheduling meetings, calling clients to confirm unimportant details, making coffee, scanning paperwork. At first I worried Claire regretted hiring me, because honestly, I knew almost nothing about legal work. The first time someone asked me to prepare deposition files, I accidentally mixed up two separate client folders and nearly gave Claire the wrong documents before a meeting. I felt absolutely horrible afterward. "I'm so sorry," I whispered while trying not to panic. But Claire simply fixed the folders calmly and said, "You're learning. No humiliation. No passive-aggressive comments. No condescending lecture. Just patience." That alone made me work even harder. Because the truth was, Claire didn't know me anything. She could have ignored me that day in her office, could have called security, could have told me to leave and never come back. Instead, she gave me a job when my entire life was collapsing. I never forgot that. So I treated every small responsibility seriously. If she needed documents organized, they were perfect. If clients called, I handled them politely. If something needed staying late for, I stayed late. And slowly, Claire started trusting me more. A few months later, she stopped checking every task behind me. Then she started letting me sit quietly during client meetings. Then eventually she allowed me to help prepare case summaries and organize evidence timelines. That was the first moment I realized legal work fascinated me. Not the dramatic television version, the real version, the endless preparation, the research, the details, the way tiny overlooked information could completely change a case. Meanwhile, life at home slowly became more stable too. Not perfect, never perfect, but manageable. For the first time in years, I could buy groceries without calculating every single item in my cart. I fixed the Honda eventually. The kids stopped asking nervous questions about money. And some nights after they fell asleep, I'd sit quietly in my apartment realizing I could breathe normally again. That feeling alone almost made me emotional sometimes. Claire and I also became closer over time. Not instantly. She wasn't overly personal by nature. But long hours together create strange bonds between people, especially when both people know what struggle feels like. One night while organizing files after work, I finally asked something I'd wondered for months. "Why did you really hire me?" Claire kept reading through documents for several seconds before answering. "Because you reminded me of myself." That surprised me. "You?" She smiled faintly. "You think successful people start successful?" I laughed softly. "I guess not." Claire leaned back in her chair thoughtfully. "When I was 26, I worked 3 jobs and slept in my office for almost 6 months." I stared at her. "What?" Nobody talks about the ugly years after they become successful. That conversation changed how I viewed her completely. Before that, Claire felt almost intimidating, untouchable. But suddenly she became human. And honestly, that made me admire her more. About a year after she hired me, everything changed again. Claire accepted an enormous corporate fraud case involving a pharmaceutical company. Not just large, massive. The kind of case that consumes people's lives completely. Millions of dollars involved. Corporate misconduct allegations. Media attention. Hundreds of documents. The second she accepted it, the entire office atmosphere shifted immediately. Everyone became tense, focused, exhausted. And Claire? She practically lived at the office after that. Most nights we stayed there until midnight surrounded by stacks of paperwork and half-empty coffee cups. Reviewing financial reports. Cross-checking timelines. Studying witness statements. Searching through thousands of emails for tiny inconsistencies. It was exhausting work. Real legal work isn't dramatic speeches in courtrooms. It's reading the same paragraph 20 times searching for one detail everyone else missed. Sometimes Claire became so mentally exhausted she'd stare silently at documents for several minutes without speaking. That's when I started helping however I could. Organizing evidence. Preparing summaries. Highlighting contradictions. Tracking timelines. Small things at first. Then bigger responsibilities. Eventually Claire stopped referring to me as office staff. She introduced me as her assistant. The first time she did that during a client meeting, I almost looked around to see if she meant someone else. But no, she meant me. And somehow that mattered more emotionally than any paycheck ever had. We became something between coworkers and friends during that case. Not the loud, dramatic kind of friendship. The quieter kind built through surviving stress together. Some nights around 11 p.m. we'd sit in her office eating terrible takeout while surrounded by legal documents. Other nights we argued over strategies and evidence timelines like we'd worked together forever. We worked side by side constantly. And despite the exhaustion, I loved it. Because for the first time in years I felt useful again. Not pitted. Not rescued. Useful. The case dragged on for months. Then over a year. Court hearings. Witness testimony. Endless procedural delays. Some days felt hopeful. Others felt impossible. There were moments when it genuinely seemed like we might lose everything. Especially after one devastating hearing where key evidence nearly became inadmissible. I remember sitting in Claire's office afterward while she rubbed her forehead silently. "We might lose this," she admitted quietly. That scared me more than I expected. Not just because of the case. Because I hated seeing Claire defeated. The woman who rescued me when my life collapsed suddenly looked exhausted in a way I'd never seen before. So I stayed later than usual that night helping reorganize evidence timelines until almost 2 a.m. Neither of us spoke much. We just kept working. Because sometimes persistence is all people have left. Then finally, after endless hearings, delays, arguments, and months of uncertainty, the truth won. I still remember the courtroom that day. The silence after the judge announced the decision. Then relief flooding through Claire's face so suddenly I thought she might cry. We won. Not partially. Not symbolically. Completely. The settlement amount was enormous. The pharmaceutical company's executives looked devastated walking out of court, while reporters crowded outside the building. Meanwhile, Claire and I just stood there stunned. For nearly 2 years, that case had consumed our lives. And somehow, we actually did it. A week later was payday. Honestly, I was excited for the first time in forever. Claire had promised me months earlier that if we won the case, she'd give me a percentage bonus because of how heavily I worked on everything. Nothing life-changing probably, but enough to finally help us breathe financially. Enough to maybe move somewhere better for the kids. Enough to feel like all those nights mattered. That morning the office felt lighter than usual. Everyone seemed relieved after the victory. Around lunchtime Claire walked calmly toward my desk. "You have a minute?" "Of course." I followed her into her office smiling slightly. Then she closed the door and sat down quietly. Something about her expression suddenly made me nervous. Claire folded her hands together. "Hannah, I'm not going to pay you the percentage we originally discussed." For a moment I genuinely stopped hearing properly. Everything inside me went numb instantly. "What?" My voice barely worked. Claire continued calmly, but I couldn't process most of the words anymore. All I felt was shock. Then anger. Then humiliation. Then betrayal. After everything. After all those nights. All that work. All that loyalty. My chest tightened painfully. I stared at her while tears started burning behind my eyes again. Not again. Please not again. And suddenly every terrible moment from the last few years came crashing back emotionally at once. The accident. The courtroom loss. The bills. The fear. The abandonment. I felt physically sick. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound startled me enough to break through the emotional fog slightly. Probably my mother asking when I'd come pick up the kids. My hands shook while unlocking the screen. But instead of a message from my mother, I saw a banking notification. Deposit received. At first the amount didn't even register properly. Then I looked again. And nearly dropped my phone. The number sitting in my account was far larger than expected. Not slightly larger. Several times larger. I looked up at Claire in complete confusion. She finally smiled. "Hannah," she said softly, "your contribution to winning this case was much bigger than you realize." I stared at her speechless. Claire leaned back in her chair. "You stopped being just an assistant a long time ago." Tears filled my eyes instantly again. But this time for completely different reasons. "You earned that bonus," she continued calmly. "Every single dollar of it." I couldn't even speak. After spending years surviving disappointment, betrayal, and broken promises, kindness still shocked me sometimes.